This is the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast, Episode 7. The Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast is a bi-weekly podcast dedicated to the world of scuba diving, ocean health, sustainability, and fostering a new generation of ocean stewards through diving education. Hello, everyone, and once again, thank you for tuning into this latest episode. I'm Jeff Cinterpino, founder and president of the Scuba Educational Alliance of Connecticut. Well, winter has certainly set in some parts of the country, especially areas around the Great Lakes. Believe it or not, we sometimes get impacted by the lake effect snow from the Great Lakes, but nothing like the 5 or 6 feet that I saw in some places. I can't even imagine trying to navigate that. Fortunately, we only got a few inches that last time, and then yesterday we had a big rainstorm. Well, the big game is this weekend, Army-Navy 2024. And while Navy has had a very good year, Army has had a spectacular season, and they look really tough. One thing we know is that you can throw out the records for Army-Navy, and hopefully the blue and gold will prevail. Go Navy. Beat Army. Now, on today's show, my featured segment will talk about an invasion. Not the lionfish invasion that we all probably know about, but another one, pulse corals. But up first is Sea State, News and Information Update. This is Sea State here on the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast for Thursday, December 12th, 2024. First up, it has happened again. Another liveaboard was lost in the Red Sea. This time it wasn't a fire or a grounding, but weather. The Sea Story liveaboard capsized and sank in the Red Sea. Some believe that it was caused by a large wave. Unfortunately, this time there was a loss of life. The Sea Story left Port Galib on Sunday, November 24 for a 5-day trip. Apparently they left despite severe weather warnings. There were 31 guests and 13 crew on board. There were, sadly, only 33 survivors, with 4 confirmed dead and 7 still missing. They did rescue 5 who were trapped for 30 hours in air pockets from the capsized vessel. Now, this is a pretty good-sized boat at 150 feet, so that would really need to be a big wave. According to the reports, the boat sank within 5 to 7 minutes. Again, the rash of liveaboard accidents is unnerving, and it makes you want to think twice. I came across an article on CBS News Online recently that indicated scientists say they discovered the world's biggest coral in the Pacific. It was so big that when they first detected it, they thought they had found a shipwreck. This world record coral was found near the Solomon Islands out in the South Pacific. The Solomon Islands are to the east of Papua New Guinea in the Coral Sea. Enrique Sala, marine ecologist and founder of the Pristine Seas Project, said, "Just when we think there is nothing left to discover on Earth, we find a massive coral made of nearly 1 billion polyps pulsating with life and color." Now, they estimate that this coral has been growing for over 300 years. It's 111 feet wide and 104 feet long. The newly discovered coral is 3 times bigger than the previous record holder called Big Mama in American Samoa. Well, this discovery does offer some hope against the backdrop of hotter and more acidic oceans. I wonder what they'll call this one. A few days ago, I came across an advertisement for the Blancpain and Swatch Bioceramic Scuba 50 Fathoms watch collection, and it is quite a collection. There are 5 watches in the series. The Ocean Collection series features the Arctic, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Antarctic. The watches have some really cool colors, and you have to see them to really appreciate the style. Each watch has a NATO strap that's made from recycled fishing nets. The back has a transparent display, and so you can see that System 51 mechanical movement. Also on the back is a nudibranch from that specific ocean. They come in a 42.3 millimeter case and are rated for a depth of 300 feet or 91 meters. When they are fully wound, there is a reserve of up to 90 hours. And the price of the Blancpain and Swatch Bioceramic Ocean Series is not too bad at $400 US. So if you're into dive watches, you can get this whole series for less than what you might pay for a single watch from another company. For me, I don't really need another dive watch, and I would have a tough time deciding on which one. I'm torn between the Pacific and the Arctic. So go ahead and check them out at swatch.com. The Reader's Choice Awards from Scuba Diving Magazine have been published, and like always, there's a lot of awards given. I always like to look at the various categories across dive destination, operators, resorts, and liveaboards. But let's start at the top, dive destinations. For the Caribbean and Atlantic, the number one destination is Mexico, with number two being the Cayman Islands. The Caymans would be my top choice. For the United States and Canada, the number one position is British Columbia, with number two being the Florida Keys. Since I'm not really into cold water diving, the Keys would be top of my list. And for the Pacific, Indian, and Mediterranean, Indonesia tops the list, with the Philippines coming in at number two. Now, I'll be visiting both in 2025 and can't wait. Now, there are so many categories to review, like where to see big animals or wrecks or locations for beginners. I did also see that the top operator for the Florida Keys is Horizon Divers. Congrats to them. So check out the November issue of Scuba Diving Magazine for all the details. The magazine is the official publication of PADI Club, and you get it as part of your membership. And while I'm on the subject of magazines, the fourth quarter edition of Alert Diver from Divers Alert Network arrived in my mailbox last week. This edition is yet another milestone for the publication. This one marked the 15th year since they redesigned the periodical. Now, I remember when they switched from the old version that was published 6 times a year. And I think they hit a home run with the changes they made back in 2009. With the move to a quarterly release and with Stephen Frink taking over as publisher, I believe they completely hit the mark with their desire to be a coffee table collectible magazine. And it is the widest circulated dive magazine in the world. There's a really great 2-page spread from all the covers since the 2009 redesign. For me, the physical copy of Alert Diver is worth every penny that I pay for the enhanced membership. I know that I recently completed a survey from Dan about Alert Diver, and it is absolutely a cover-to-cover read for me. Now, there was a nice article in the advanced diving section this time by Ladd Atkins on lionfish hunting, plus a very informative piece on lives of spiny lobster by Mickey McCombs-Kobza. Now, I consider Alert Diver from Dan a must-read for every scuba diver. And finally, let's wrap up with a little shipwreck news. This comes from explorersweb.com by Rebecca McPhee. The headline is Archaeologists Uncover Shipwreck from Vasco da Gama's Final Voyage. Perhaps there should be a question mark at the end of that. Now, this wreck was actually discovered in 2013 off the coast of Kenya in the Indian Ocean, but never identified. But now they believe that this is the wreck of the Sao Jorge, part of da Gama's fleet. Vasco da Gama was a Portuguese explorer and the first to sail around the Cape of Good Hope. The path essentially linked Europe to the Indian Ocean and opened up trade. Da Gama made 4 voyages around the Cape of Good Hope. His last one was in 1524. Now, this wreck is in only 6 meters of water, and what they've found so far are copper ingots, elephant tusks, and timber from the ship. I also checked out a statement from the archaeologist, and it doesn't sound like they have definitively identified the wreck, but are pretty sure it's the Sao Giorgio. That might be declaring victory prematurely. One thing, however, is that they shouldn't have any issues with bottom time with the ongoing archaeological surveys. Well, that's it for this installment of Sea State here on the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast. I saw my first lionfish on May 22nd, 2008, and that was during my first dive trip to the Bahamas, and it was on our very first dive of the trip. The dive site was the DC-3 wall where they filmed some of the underwater sequences for Into the Blue. Wow, a Hollywood wreck and a lionfish. Both were not really supposed to be there. The plane was a set created by humans, and the lionfish was also there because of human interaction. Some believe the lionfish invasion started with the release from an aquarium. The lionfish issue has been well documented and discussed along with various ways to control the population. And while this continues to be troubling, there is another invasion in the tropical western Atlantic that has been pretty much under the radar, that of pulse corals. I only recently became aware of pulse corals. Dr. Alex Brilski wrote a recent article in Scuba Diving Industry magazine to bring awareness to this invasion. It is titled Soft Corals, A New Caribbean Invasion. You can Google that title by Dr. Brilski and it'll pop to the top of your list. At least it did for me. He also discussed this invasion on the Level Up podcast. There are two specific types of invasive corals right now, Eunomia stolonifera and Xenia membramcracea or betata. Those are really hard to say. These corals are favorites of aquarists. Why? Because they are really beautiful corals, they have an exponential growth, and are very resilient. You see, they are soft corals where the polyps are always out. They don't retract. The polyps are continuously opening and closing, thus the reason they are called pulse corals. And because they can reproduce both asexually and by fragmentation, pulse corals can quickly overgrow coral reefs and seagrass meadows. Why hasn't this pulse coral invasion been talked about much? Well, that is because up until now it's only affected the reefs off of Venezuela. Now also on the Level Up podcast was Carlos Lender, and he had an article in the magazine about diving on Marguerite Island, Venezuela. Now that could be an interesting place, just hard to get to from the U.S. right now. But interestingly, Carlos had also written about this invasion with a blog post in the August 2023 Dan Europe website. You can also Google that. In that blog, he indicated that we are pretty sure that humans introduced this deliberately into the environment. The discovery was a while ago when Juan Pedro Ruiz Alers, a biologist, noticed a new shiny coral while diving the reefs off of Venezuela. Well, it took several years before the research was published after first contact, but by then the ecological disaster had already taken place with the pulse corals. Now, invasive species are really part of the natural evolution, but globalization has made it much worse as there is unnatural acceleration. This particular invasion of pulse corals is believed to have been started in Venezuela when an Aquarius entrepreneur decided to grow the pulse corals commercially and provide them as a coral species for decorating aquariums. Well, it got out of control quickly because of the way the corals reproduce. Broken fragments of the soft coral easily get to different parts of the reef. In his blog, Carlos talks about two different approaches in dealing with invasive species. One is through biocontrol, and that is where you introduce another organism which could be a natural predator for the invasive species. Now, I think about the mongoose's introduction to Hawaii to control the rat population in the sugarcane fields. The mongoose proved to be a devastation to some of Hawaii's most native species and fauna. So biocontrol of an invasive species can be very dangerous, and not sure if there's anything that can be done with these pulse corals. Then there is eradication. We hear about that all the time with lionfish derbies and hunts, but can we really get rid of them in the Caribbean? Probably not. Now, when it comes to pulse corals, this is even more problematic. First, they are a little more difficult to identify, and then if you try to remove them from the reef, you can significantly increase the risk of fragmentation and spreading. So why has Dr. Brilski brought this to our attention and scuba diving professionals now? You see, there have been reports of these pulse corals in Cuba and Puerto Rico. Also, the ABC Islands, that's Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, are also on the alert and are considered high-risk areas for this invasion of pulse corals. Florida is also on alert and concerned about the corals invading their reefs. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission website has a page regarding invasive soft corals. The website has a description of the pulse corals along with pictures to help identify the species. Now, they are pretty direct in telling folks not to touch the coral, obviously because of the risk of fragmentation. And they want you to report any findings by using the USGS Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Sighting Form. I clicked on that and it's pretty detailed. Like I mentioned, it's probably challenging to determine if you spotted these corals. My recommendation would be, if you have a camera, take the best photo you can without hitting the corals and get some experts to weigh in on your find. I'm sure Dr. Brilski would be interested. In addition to the spread caused by the release from aquarists and illegal aquaculture, coral fragments are easily attached to boats, fishing gear, ballast water, and yes, even dive gear. That's why it's so important to really clean your dive gear, not just give it a quick dunk. Make sure that you thoroughly soak, wash, and rinse your rig, and don't forget about that BC bladder. There's been a lot of research regarding stony coral tissue loss disease, and they have found that it is very likely spread by diving activity. And when it comes to these pulse corals, not hitting the reef with good buoyancy control is paramount. Coral reefs around the world are under stress, and invasive species are just another element adding to the demise of these vital ecosystems. Now, on my most recent trip to Cayman Brac, I did still see some lionfish on the reef, not as many as in past years, but they are still there. I wasn't on the lookout for pulse corals, but going forward, now that I'm informed, I will take a good hard look at the reefs and hopefully not spot any of these invaders. I encourage all of you divers out there to get informed and be on the lookout. Well, I hope that my discussion on pulse corals was informative. I hadn't heard of them before, and now I have something else to put on my list of things to be on the lookout for when diving in the Caribbean. Of course, I will gladly see them in the Indo-Pacific next October. So that wraps up this latest episode. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss a show. Until next time, have a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, and I'll talk to you after Christmas. Take care, everyone. This has been the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast, a show dedicated to the world of scuba diving, ocean health, sustainability, and fostering a new generation of ocean stewards through diving education. Talk to you again real soon.